Hi, my name is Daniel Arbino. I'm the head of collection development for the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm very excited to talk today about one of our absolute most important collections, the Gloria Anzaldúa papers. And before we jump into that, I just want to express my gratitude to the conference organizers, to the Lozano Long Conference, and of course to my fellow panelists. For sharing this moment with me, and I'm really looking forward to everyone else's talks as well. Okay, so my presentation is called Una herida abierta, the Anzaldúa Archives as a Nepantla space for healing. Stemming from the battle for Texas independence of 1836 and the Mexican-American War, the historic processes affecting Tejanos' relationships with Mexico and the United States have endured to the present and have pervaded all aspects of Tejano culture. Generations of Tejanos, those people of Hispanic or Latino descent that are born in Texas, have been exposed to the United States prioritization of English as the dominant language, Protestant values and work ethic, and whiteness as a racial normativity. In many cases, Tejanos and their lands have been the victims of manifest destiny and the denial of preceding land grants. Racial acts of violence targeted Mexican and Mexican Americans and were often perpetrated by Texas law enforcement, as Monica Munoz Martinez shows in The Injustice Never Leaves You. Meanwhile, the school system segregated Tejanos into the civil rights era, and though much has changed since that period, Tejanos still find themselves, Tejanos and Latino communities still find themselves the target of discrimination, from police brutality to inaccurate representation in media and textbooks to institutional erasures. This synopsis of the Tejano plight, however brief in general, is paramount to an understanding of the significance of the Gloria Anzaldúa papers at the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection. The US-Mexican border es una herida abierta, where the third world grates against the first and bleeds, says Anzaldúa in her seminal text, Borderlands La Frontera. She continues, and before a scab forms, it bleeds again, the lifeblood of two worlds merging to form a third country, a border culture, end quote. In an early draft of the work, an editor suggests that Anzaldúa avoid such injurious imagery, stating, and I quote, "Don't like the bleeding as an image here," end quote. The Chicana feminist included the line anyway, turning it into one of the book's most memorable passages. What can be gleaned from Anzaldúa's incorporation of a wound as the beginning of something transformative? And perhaps more importantly, what might it say about Anzaldúa's understanding of community, sociocultural exclusion, and healing? In this presentation, I intend to analyze Anzaldúa's concepts alongside unpublished journal entries within her archival collection at the Benson as a means to interrogate what Aníbal Quijano refers to as the coloniality of power. It's precisely Anzaldúa's decolonial mode of thinking that offers healing to culturally excluded groups. Therefore, I am interested in how Anzaldúa contests and undoes hegemonic practices that have reproduced what Walter Mignolo calls the colonial wound, binary thinking articulated through constructions of gender, sexuality, race, class, and citizenship. Quijano coins the coloniality of power to discuss the structures of hegemony, race, capitalism, Eurocentrism, etc., that have emerged in the present day as a direct result of colonialism. Through these structures, Europe was able to legitimize a racial hierarchy that privileged one racial group over others so that, and I quote Quijano, the conquered and dominated peoples were situated in a natural position of inferiority, and as a result, their phenotypic traits as well as their cultural features were considered inferior, end quote. Europeans and later Euro-Americans used these hierarchies to justify the control of labor, for example. The subjugated groups were enslaved or forced to work, as well as to control knowledge. Modernity thus becomes exclusive to European experiences. Quijano's rendering of the legacies of colonialism underscores how academia continues to discount Anzaldúa and like-minded Chicana writers despite their increasing popularity. That's to say, academia as a system of knowledge is still entrenched in privileging European and Euro-American thoughts and its writers. This is evident in archives as well, generally speaking, because the stereotype that archival collections often represent the whims of white, heterosexual men of the middle to upper class does have historic grounding. However, this is not the case at the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection, a repository focusing on Latin American, US Latinx, and as of 6 years ago, Black diasporic subject matter. Within it, the Gloria Anzaldúa papers are the most visited, which gives me great pride and also draws scholars from as far as Japan. The fact that Anzaldúa, as a queer Chicana feminist, breaks that mold at the premier Latin American and US Latinx collection in the world points to the significance of diversifying collections to stave off community erasure and heal the colonial wound. I use the term wound because Walter Mignolo refers to the consequences of Quijano's coloniality of power as the colonial wound. He states that, and I quote, "The wound is the feeling of inferiority imposed on human beings who do not fit the predetermined model in Euro-American narratives," end quote. In the wound's constant generation of pain, humiliation, and anger, Mignolo finds hope for new socio-political movements and knowledge. Anzaldúa carries this very wound in her early days at the University of Texas at Austin, where she received her master's degree in English and education in 1972 and began a PhD program in 1974. In an unpublished journal entry dated July 17, 1968, Anzaldúa discusses her desires to fit in with the other students in her class, and I quote, "I bought myself 3 short dresses and a tank knit shirt today. I did this to keep up with the rest of the thigh-showing college girls, only in my case, my legs are a little too thick," end quote. Of note here is Anzaldúa's recognition of Eurocentric aesthetics regarding beauty and her admission that she does not fit within them. Thus, in an effort to reach this unattainable model, she resorts to Western modes of consumerism and fashion that the dominant culture imposes upon her. That's to say, buying trendy clothes to feel a sense of belonging that can alleviate the sentiment of inferiority that she expresses when describing her body. Concerns with her body image, a theme throughout much of Anzaldúa's work, are a direct response of the colonial wound as it pertains to Western ideas of beauty. These types of hegemonic impositions stem from legacies regarding the construction of race as outlined in Cornel West's A Genealogy of Modern Racism. West identifies a normative gaze, or, and I quote, "an ideal from which to order and compare observations that emerge from Eurocentric values of beauty, proportion, and human form that can play a role in the emergence of the idea of white supremacy," end quote. Although West's focus pertains primarily to the Black diaspora, a similar imposition of cultural attitudes that alienate others based on beauty is affecting Anzaldúa's sense of self. In another example of the colonial wound, this is a journal entry dated July 18th, 1968, a similar sense of inferiority appears. While the previous example referred to physical aesthetic, the following deals more with utilizing an academic register to perform as an academic. Anzaldúa writes of her first impressions of class, and I quote, "I've once again come to the realization that I'm not up to standards as a college graduate with a BA and as a master's candidate, and as one involved with English as a major. This morning, I heard a couple graduate students in English discussing any number of subjects with an ease and a vocabulary that I envied. How can I go about to learn to speak like that?" End quote. Here, Anzaldúa struggles with the authority that Western society gives to those with an academic vocabulary because it signifies certain levels of education, class, and status. The notion of speaking English at such a profound level particularly when spoken by a Chicana from the borderlands, can only be contextualized in a long history of forcing English in the school system. Here, of course, a hegemonic institution in its own right, and devaluing the use of Spanish during the period in which Ansaldúa came of age. As peer Norma Elia Cantu notes, their shared experience of being ridiculed not only by Anglo teachers for using Spanish, but also by Mexican-American teachers. Ansaldúa later develops this concept in Borderlands La Frontera as linguistic terrorism, or the feeling of illegitimacy due to the dominant culture's attempt to standardize languages such as English or Spanish, and a subsequent cultural orphaning for those that do not align with the standard language's symbolic reinforcement of national identities. I point to these two examples from Ansaldúa's collection because they demonstrate insecurities regarding looks, intellect, and imposter syndrome that might be relatable to most college students, particularly those who are members, who identify as members of first generation or culturally excluded groups. Yet Ansaldúa's trajectory does not stop there, and that is what makes her collection all the more appealing when we talk about healing and recovery. What Ansaldúa originally views as a weakness becomes a sense of strength and pride. In Borderlands La Frontera, for instance, she writes in multiple registers, multiple languages, and in that freedom, she finds healing for the internalized linguistic terrorism that she experiences in her English class. If Quijano presents the hegemonic systems put in place through the legacies of colonialism, and Mignolo identifies the wound that one carries as a result of these legacies, then Ansaldúa's writing provides a means to healing. Of the many examples, one might be her conceptualization of the Coyolxauhqui imperative. Ansaldúa defines this concept as, and I quote, the necessary process of dismemberment and fragmentation, of seeing that self or the situations you're embroiled in differently. It is also my symbol for reconstruction and reframing, one that allows for putting the pieces together in a new way. The Coyolxauhqui imperative is an ongoing process of making and unmaking. There is never any resolution, just the process of healing, end quote. For Ansaldúa, the Coyolxauhqui imperative need not focus solely on the individual, but it can. That's to say, a person who carries a wound or a trauma, whether it is spiritual, physical, or emotional, and who is now on a journey toward self-reconstruction. However, the fact that Ansaldúa wrote the article, "Let Us Be the Healing of the Wound," in which she first lays out this imperative shortly after 9/11, suggests that there is a larger societal stake in the matter. It is this societal stake that I want to consider regarding archives as a Nepantla place for healing. By Nepantla, I refer to yet another of Ansaldúa's concepts. In this one, she describes a liminal in-between space, whether psychological, creative, or physical, where multiple perspectives occur, so a person who is neither from here nor there can see from outside their enculturation. She calls it, to quote, uncertain terrain one crosses when moving from one place to another, when changing from one class, race, sexual position to another, when traveling from the present identity to a new identity, end quote. The definition expands from a state of mind to mobility within social constructs, class and race, as well as physical position, where there is a fluidity between different identities, social groups, and places. What is more, the movement implies a sense of freedom. Nepantla affords the person different perspectives and realities to contest sites of power. To be certain, in this definition of the term, those contestations still happen from within the sites of power because identity politics like class and race are still present, but the language has transformed to empowerment. In this liminality, the opportunity for the Coyolxauhqui imperative can flourish because Nepantla is characterized by transition. Ansaldúa says, and I quote, in Nepantla, we hang out between shifts, trying to make rational sense of this crisis, seeking solace, support, appeasement, or some kind of intimate connection, end quote. The Benson, perhaps more so than other special collections, is liminal for several reasons. We might consider the Benson's multivalent positionality within both UT libraries and the Lilas-Benson partnership. However, I'm referring more specifically to its collections, where contradictions occur among the different voices within them, where identity politics are paradoxically reinforced and eschewed, where collections challenge master narratives, engender activism, and seek solidarity. The Benson is also liminal because it operates within a contested space, seeking to make available Latin American and US Latinx resources within an institution that asserts hegemonic discourses, often to the expense of students and faculty of color. Having Ansaldúa as our most visited collection can therefore challenge that narrative while serving as a conduit to healing. To that end, we may consider the Coyolxauhqui imperative at an institutional level. In the Coyolxauhqui imperative in developing comunidad-situated writing curricula at Hispanic-serving institutions, Indalecio, Isaac, Hinojosa, and Candace Cepeda applied Ansaldúa's concept to higher education's need to reflect on wounds that academia has caused to students from socioculturally excluded communities in order to promote healing for these student groups. The goal is that institutions work toward self-reconstruction by creating spaces for students, particularly those of color, to, and I quote the article here, utilize literacy to negotiate, resist, and even transform local communities, end quote. In this model, students are encouraged to connect community-based and home-based knowledge with academic experiences, to develop an attentiveness to the body, to consider the intersection of body and writing, and to identify rhetorical acts as interactive and relational. The definition of the imperative, positioned as a form of holistic healing from hegemonic cultural practices, serves as a liberating force of agency within these practices as students attempt to make and remake their sense of self through the curriculum. The Coyolxauhqui imperative is how I want to think about the significance of Ansaldúa's archival collection at the Benson, because it offers, to quote a longtime Ansaldúa friend Ana Louise Keating, both the acknowledgement of the painful fragmentation and the promise of transformative healing, end quote, that many of our students and faculty negotiate. Ansaldúa's concept, this Coyolxauhqui imperative, and its move from personal to societal, provides a framework and principle for the Benson's engagement with her collection and how we collect in the future. As her works challenge genres and blur academic writing with poetry and autobiographical accounts, so too does her archival collection invite librarians and scholars alike to re-examine the types of voices needed in repositories to contest master narratives. This goes hand in hand with her commentary on her role as an artist. Ansaldúa writes about the artist's role in healing and reconciliation. And I quote, "My job as an artist is to bear witness to what haunts us, to step back and attempt to see the pattern in these events, personal and societal, and how we can repair el daño, the damage, by using the imagination and its visions. I believe in the transformative power and medicine of art." Like her work, I argue that her archive has similar medicinal properties to repairing institutionalized exclusion, broadly speaking, thereby subverting hegemony. In that vein, Ansaldúa's papers are an inspiration for Latinx and Latin American students who find themselves on a campus that has historically excluded them, and through building names and statues has often lauded historical Anglo figures that have been injurious to or dismissive of Mexican and Mexican-American populations in the state. Ansaldúa's collection serves to underscore Mexican and Mexican-Americans population's value and their right to be here. In her collection, in her intersectional positionality as a queer Chicana feminist from Texas, they find a part of themselves and hopefully a pathway to inclusion. Therefore, her papers foster a sense of intergenerational continuity that is conducive to understanding one's subjectivity. That intergenerational continuity happens anytime a student takes the La Chicana class that Ansaldúa first taught. I have seen these positive effects play out each semester when I lead at least one archival showing on the Ansaldúa papers for a course. In my short time with students, we consider her personal and professional life in an effort to demonstrate to students her humble beginnings and the grandiose career that they could aspire to if they wish. Faculty and I have asked students to reflect, to consider their own positionality and subjectivity within these sessions. We have asked them to share their own home-based experiences and knowledge alongside Ansaldúa's. And we've asked them to start thinking about what their archival collection is going to contain. I have observed students read through her journal pages, consider the different drafts of her unpublished autobiography, and ponder her artwork. Many students return to consult the archive individually. At that moment, they may be sharing the Rare Books reading room with someone who has traveled from France to consult the collection, or a scholar who is in Austin on the Center for Mexican American Studies Ansaldúa Research Fellowship. And in that beautiful moment, I cannot help but think of the solidarity that Ansaldúa espoused, particularly among mujeres, so that students continue to connect with our collections. We have pursued like-minded feminist writers such as Alicia Gaspar de Alba. In this way, the Ansaldúa collection has also been transformative for the Benson, urging us to embrace ambivalence and liminality and to move toward constant making and remaking. In this state of Nepantla, we aim to provide resources that lead to recovery. And with that, I conclude my presentation. I really look forward to the conversation that will follow. Thank you so much.